this is not a specific show. Um, Basically, we went to the Met and went to see another show, and I kind of stumbled into the early Aegean wing. That's when you go into the Greek, classical Greek wing at the Met. It's like right there off to the right. And I started looking at these things more closely. Now, I had seen this work before and always was attracted to it and loved it, but um, this was, it really intrigued me, and I thought this has a direct relationship to modernism, and I started to explore that idea. Um, there there really has not been a show that's devoted to this specifically, although there's direct evidence that a lot of the early modernists were affected by this work. Um, so it, the interesting part about this to me is that we don't know very much about them. That this is the Aegean was colonized in began to be colonized in 6000 BCE. Okay, we're talking 8,000 years ago. There were people that were colonizing those islands. So there were three distinct cultures that were there for a very, very long time. We think that they were colonized from the Middle East, Samaria, and Persia, Syria. There were various forces that were at work in those islands. So we think that's where they came from, but we have really no idea. This is prehistoric. So what we will start out with is I will delve into some of the archaeological and historically relevant issues a little bit later. But for now, what I wanted to start off with is starting to talk about how this artwork influenced modernism. And we know that African art, especially masks, had a profound effect on 20th century artists like Picasso, Brancusi, Modigliani. It's well documented. We know this. Recently, other figures like people like Henry Moore and Joseph and Annie Albers, their fascination with pre-Columbian art and architecture has been explored in depth in exhibitions and added a new dimension to modernism. But this other significant, largely unexplored effect on avant-garde, the Cycladic art, predating the ancient Greeks. Now, these were not Greeks. This was not Greek culture. These were distinct cultures that were pre-Greek. These really elegantly simplified sculptures and frescoes had a profound effect on the development of modernism. Not much is known about the civilization inhabited the Cyclades. It's a cluster of islands. Let's see. Well, it's a cluster of islands in the center of the Aegean Sea, rich in gold, silver, copper, obsidian, and marble. The islands had natural resources that enabled tremendous prosperity and resulted in a flourishing of an enduringly unique strain of art that lasted from around the numbers are mushy. I put it at 4,000 BCE until almost 11,000 BCE. So that's a tremendous amount. We're talking about millennia of development in this area. And there were three distinct cultures, as I said. The Cycladic, which is a group of islands, and I'll show you those. I'll show you where they're located. The Cycladic Islands, the Minoan culture, which was basically started out on Crete, but spread out through the Aegean, and the Mycenaean, which was basically on the southern end of the Greek isthmus. Yeah, it's down there. There's a couple of islands that they were on, but it developed there and then spread throughout the region. As you see here, this is a early Cycladic sculpture, marble female figure. These were not upright. We see them displayed this way, but actually where they were found, they were laying down. They don't have feet that they can stand up on. So they're meant to be laid out. We don't know the purpose of these. There were many purposes. This is the mists of time are casting a fog over this, and I love that aspect of it, and so did the modernists. And so you see the kind of fertility goddess element in the Giacometti, and the other sculpture here. I think it's you can see the relationship to this. These flat abstracted figurines of the female body provide one example of how its representation evolved in the Cycladic art. And you can see this. I'm going to move this out of the way. You can see, the evolution of this. And let's see. Okay. And now the female figures, as I said, they lay down. The male figures are often active, playing the lute. In this case, the harp, and they were all painted. So we see these beautiful marble sculptures now, but there are remnants of paint on many of them. And, so all of them were pretty brightly painted. And I'll explore that a little bit more later too. Okay. Here's Pablo Picasso. Again, you can see the mask-like quality of that. Somebody had a question here. Let's see. Okay.
Not a question, Larry. Keep
Not
going.
a question. Okay. All right. Okay. So, yeah. Okay. it's easy to see the connections between Cycladic art and modern counterparts. It's the fertility function um, of the Cycladic artifacts. Substantial portion of all the busts and torsos and figurines are women, while there's an occasional male, um, albeit um, it's the modernists are using this as a in a secular sense rather than a religious sense. They seem to refer to the archaic Greek statues. Um, so, you know, they have a fabulous collection, and some of these pieces I took shots of at the Met. So they have they have wonderful examples of all of this there. And Picasso again, the African mask, but also I would say that see the digs that brought the Aegean culture to the attention of the West happened in the late 1800s and early 20th century. So really contemporaneously with the development of modernism, these discoveries were happening in the Aegean Sea. And here's a Giacometti spoon woman. Now I know that the spoon woman was from a African sculpture, but I would also say, there's a direct relationship to the Cycladic fertility goddess. And in looking at this and looking back at the Picasso, you can see the kind of cubistic, angular development in this piece. Okay. Um, the okay, the frying pan, um, that's what they named them because they kind of look like frying pans, but they were actually sacramental bowls. If you can't see the back of it. Well, this is actually the back of it. You can't see the top, which has a lip around it, so you can pour liquids into it: water, wine, oil, whatever the sacramental element you want to put in there. So these were used as ritual bowls, and there are many of these frying pan things. And I brought that in because I thought there was again a relationship to the Giacometti. Okay. And this Modigliani and the Brancusi, um, they really, have a relationship to these Cycladic heads. Um, the 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 Cycladic art and the attention that it got in the avant-garde um, actually was spurred on by illegal traffic um, in digging out many of the grave sites on the islands. many of these sculptures were buried in burial sites in the graves. So in fact, the long, thin figurines were buried with men and women. Some of them were broken, placed in there, but many of them were intact also. And then some graves didn't have any at all. So there was no consistency to this. And we have no idea what the actual relationship, but many of the Western museums got pilfered artwork. So these were really, they were coming into the West quite a bit into the museum. So you can see the Brancusi's graceful head and the relationship to that piece. There's also, the relationship to the Modigliani is pretty clear. The long, elongated nose and simplified features. And here's another Brancusi. It's a painted bronze piece, really lovely. But again, you see that. Okay. And I looked at this piece, and if I did not know that it was in that case that I took a shot of, I would swear that this was a Henry Moore. And so actually, let's see. All right, we're going to move to here. And this is a Henry Moore. And he would have seen pieces like this. So Moore's modernist primitivism openly recorded his admiration for prehistoric art. And he kind of crossed components. He took prolific notebooks, drawings in the 1920s illustrating African, oceanic, Peruvian, northwest coast of America, Inuit artifacts and sculpture. Also Egyptian, Sumerian, and Cycladic examples. So that relationship we can definitely document. He was definitely looking at these things. Okay. So all right, now we're going to get to the map, and these islands in red are really the Cycladic islands. Cycladic art is best known for small-scale marble figurines, the late 4th millennia BC to early 2nd millennia. The Cycladic sculptures went through a series of stylistic shifts, with their body forms varying from geometric to organic. The purpose of these figurines is unknown, although all have been discovered were located in graves. It's clear that they were regularly used for funerary purposes and practices. Their precise function remains a mystery. And then on the right is Akrotiri was one of the major cities on Thera, which is modern-day Santorini. And this was a 17th century BCE fresco of these young men, fishermen. And I will talk more about the frescoes. We're gonna be seeing quite a few of those. But you see where they're situated and how, the influences from Egypt and from the Middle East would have permeated those islands. They were seafaring, had to be in order to continue and expand trade. Okay, and this is a shot of one of the cabinets at the Met, and you see at the bottom one of the figurines laying down in the position that they actually would have been found in. Just beautiful shapes on these things, and the inventiveness of these pieces is really incredible. Okay, and as I said, the sculptures were painted. This was from an exhibition that took place at the Metropolitan. It was, I think it was over in March of this past year. But this gives you some idea. They actually took plaster casts and painted them to represent the kind of color that would have been painted onto many of these sculptures. And it looks really garish at this stage of the game, but hey, they did their research, so they came up with these pigments, and this is really very colorful. We think of all these movies that we've seen of the Greeks roaming around in these white togas and all that stuff. Well, not so much. And we'll see more examples in some of the frescoes that I'm going to show. Okay.
Larry, I like
yes.
that so much.
Yeah.
I was perfect word. It was so garish. Okay.
So here's a set from the Metropolitan. Basically you see that they have quite a collection there, and it's amazing. There are cabinets filled with these things, just hundreds and hundreds of them. I was just delighted. Okay. And now I'm going to talk about these three cultures that I alluded to earlier. So the Cycladian culture inhabited basically the islands that are in green. Okay, and they were, it says 2500 BCE to 1900 BCE, but they began to be colonized much earlier than that. They began to be colonized in about 4000 BCE. In fact, Sumeria, the image that was in the center when I started this thing was from 6000 BCE and has various crude similarities to some of the fertility goddesses that we see in the Cyclades. But this was the earliest culture, and they developed a very unique and very beautiful kind of flowing quality to the work. The Minoan culture came to the fore in around 2000 BCE, ranging to about 1400 BCE. That was mainly begun on Crete and expanded out to the kind of the Cycladian islands. And the black line that is around the outside is actually the range of the Mycenaean culture, which came later and was a bit more warlike and actually conquered many of these lands and integrated them into their social fabric. But the overlaps between these cultures is really interesting and very mushy as far as like making it really distinct who's who and where was what. But it adds to the intrigue of this whole thing, at least for me. So and here is one of these remarkable frescoes. It's it's on Aquatiri, and basically one of the reasons that these frescoes were so well preserved is there was a cataclysmic volcanic eruption in the center of the island of Thera, and the entire center of the island was blown out. It's a giant caldera now. And these frescoes were covered with 6 feet of ash. So the color remains very strong. Now, I'm gonna take a sidestep now and technically talk a little bit about fresco. There are a couple of different types of frescoes. Fresco can be painted onto the wall, like the Egyptians painted their hieroglyphics and their tomb paintings directly onto the wall, painting pigments on it rather than the technique which was developed in the Cycladian islands and on Crete and the Mycenaeans. Their atmosphere was much more liquid. There's a lot more rain. So in Egypt, it's very dry. They could manage to, use the pigment in a very different way. Painting it on and letting it sink in was enough to last and to survive. These pieces actually are layered. There's an underlay. Basically, they do stone and brickwork, and then they cover that with clay and straw, and then they do a gypsum lime combination mixed with pigment. So this was wet plaster that had pigment mixed into it to create these frescoes on the islands. And that's one of the reasons why they survive and why they hold so much color. Okay, enough technical. There's a very different spirit to these pieces than the Egyptians and the Asian Near East. The Middle East had a very different feel. There's a lyricism to these frescoes, and I'm going to move to the next and show you some details. Okay, so these are details of the lilies that were painted into this fresco, and the swallows. So you can see, there's a real beauty to these things, and a kind of level of naturalism that was not in the Egyptians. There's an observation of how those flowers actually work, and you know, they're decorative as opposed to religious. And most of the Egyptian um, uh, murals and paintings were either recording history or in service to a god or goddess or the leaders, which is saying the same thing, basically the kings and queens, the that reigned over them. And in the Middle East and in Syria, Mesopotamia, and all of that, they were painting gods and goddesses. This is more decorative. Not that they didn't paint gods and goddesses, but this is a very different take. It was really kind of art for art's sake. Okay, wait a minute. Yeah, all right. This is the saffron gatherers, and this was again on in Akrotiri, and they are gathering saffron. The process of that is, and I didn't know this, that it's actually taking the saffron from the stamen of a crocus. So it's a very tedious process, and these young women, young actually girl in the case of the one on the right, and teenager in the case of the one on the left. And the reason that we can say that is the hairdo. The one on the right has short cropped hair and a ponytail and forelock. The one on the left her hair is starting to grow out. So they were adolescent girls out there getting the saffron from the crocus. And here's a detail. Oh, that young woman, that young girl in this case, pulling the saffron. And
Larry, saffron
yes,
is pollen. It's the pollen.
Yes,
yeah,
correct. It's the pollen.
yep. Which is why it's so expensive.
Yeah,
Very
exactly.
expensive.
Exactly.
Right.
I had no idea. So, yeah, and you can see the shapes of the body. It's very different from the kind of stiffness in the Egyptian. I didn't pull up or put out any Egyptians, but I think most people have some sense of what I'm talking about when I say that. Okay, and this is all right. Here's a timeline: 6000 BCE. The Cyclades were inhabited by settlers from the Middle East. The first settlement was on Thera in 4500 BCE. We're talking about 6,500 years ago. Basically, they built these palaces, and they organized into kind of municipal communities. There's minimal standing figurines produced in the Cyclades. Most of them were used, like the figurines that were laying down in the grave areas. But very sophisticated architecture. Okay, and here's a wonderful fresco, the blue monkeys. I love this thing. Yeah. And again, you see that this is deteriorated to some degree, but it was buried in Akrotiri, and
Larry, we don't see anything called the Blue Monkeys.
you don't see the monkeys here.
No,
What are you seeing?
I'm still seeing the form of the previous slide.
Really? This one? Oh, that's
Well,
weird.
It's not moving ahead. It's
It's
still the
not moving
housing
ahead.
ruins of Thera.
Okay. Weird.
Oh, there we go.
Okay.
Now we see it.
Good. Okay. So there's the blue monkeys. Um, okay. Yeah. So did this move on to the
Yes.
Minoan women? Okay,
Yes.
good. All right. So these small scale sculptures of the Minoans were produced in many different materials. So we're now moving on from the Cyclades into the Minoans. Okay. Now there's an overlap between the Minoans and the Cyclades. These small sculptures were made with many different materials: ivory, gold, faience, which comes from Egypt, and bronze. Variety of materials acknowledge the extensive trade network established by the Minoans. For instance, faience is quartz ceramic from Egypt. Its presence in the sculpture is found on Crete. It demonstrates the material was shipped raw from Egypt to Crete, where it was then formed into to create the sculpture. Bronze was an important material in the Minoan culture. Many figurines were produced with the lost wax casting method. The snake goddess we're going to move on to. One figurine known as the snake goddess depicts a woman with her open arms holding a snake in each hand, with a feline sitting on its head. The purpose of the function of the statue is unknown, although it's believed that she may have been an earth goddess or priestess. The snakes were considered cathodic animals related to the earth and the ground, and are often symbols of the earth deities. Furthermore, the snake goddess is dressed in layered skirts, a tight bodice covering her shoulders, and exposed breasts. Prominence of her breasts may suggest her fertility. Okay. So here we are. Minoan snake goddess or priestess. Ancient Aegean Egyptian faience. So you can see the faience in the skirt on the snake goddess. And again, the image of the snakes, the goddess, the woman, renewal, shedding skins, rebirth, renewal. And one of the things that this reminded me of and my wife Soan pointed this out, was it looks like Nikki de Saint Phal. And some of you may have seen my talk on Nikki de Saint Phal, but she was a wonderful artist from the 50s through the early 2000s, who did these wonderful earth goddesses.
And she did the nanas. I've never
She
forgotten
did the
that.
nanas, who were
Right,
also earth
fabulous.
goddesses. So, okay, La Parisienne. Now, this got its name from the hairdo on her. At the time when this discovery was made, actually, that was all the vogue in Paris. So they named this fragment, and it's a tiny fragment, La Parisienne. It describes this fragment found at Knossos on the island of Crete, measurement of 10 inches high, elaborately detailed female is shown in profile, large eyes, dominating her face, along with the red lips and long wavy hair. Subtle composition. Well, it's really, again, back to what I was saying before about colorful dress. They, you see it in these frescoes where there's, striped garments and multicolored things. And again, although this looks really subtle here, my wager would be that those colors were much brighter when they were first put into the fresco. And okay, so we're showing the island of Crete so that you can get some idea of what we're talking about now. Knossos was the biggest city and biggest temple on the island, and that's dead center toward the top of the island. But there were many palaces. There were 6 palaces and country homes and things like that. There was an affluence to be able to develop this art. You can see that they had a kind of disposable wealth that they could do something like this. Okay. So the bull leaping. This was a sport. Now, there was a lot of athletics. A lot of the sculptures were athletics, music, hunting, warriors, things like that. This bull leaping thing was part of their, kind of athletic sport. And basically the idea of this is you see the person in the front of the bull grabbing the horns. The idea is you grab the horns of the bull, and when the bull rears its head up, you use that to vault off and land on the back and flip off the back of the bull. You can bet that there were some accidents that happened along those lines. Really interesting. And this was an actual practice and a sport that was taking place. Now, the mythological roots of all of this and where we go with that is something that we're going to go into a bit more. Okay. So here's a close-up of the landing on the back of the bull, flipping off. And one of the things that I want to cover, let's see if I can come up with this now. I have a sheet here, if I can find it, that goes into more of the depth. on, yeah, you know what? I'm gonna wing it and make this one up because I can't grab the paper that I had. It's okay. So Theseus and the Minotaur. What happened was the name of the Minoan culture was made up by the guy who unearthed Gnosis in Crete. And Minos was the king, supposedly, as the myth goes. His wife, um, and I'm spacing out her name, Penelope, I believe, may have been her name. Minos had a bit of a thing with Zeus. Zeus got angry at King Minos and sends this bull down to make love to his wife, to Minos's wife, Penelope. She gets impregnated by this bull. She has a child, which is part beast and part human, the Minotaur. This Minotaur is held captive by King Minos in something called the labyrinth. And so basically how the story goes is Minos's other son went to the Olympian games, and was actually gored and killed by the same bull that impregnated Minos's wife. So as a tribute, Minos had 7 maids and 7 men sent to be fed to the Minotaur in the labyrinth. This basically the Minotaur eats people and needs to be fed once a year in order to keep from coming out and wreaking havoc on the rest of the population. So Theseus is the son of I'm spacing out what the name of the king was that was up in Greece at the time, but Theseus says, I'm going to go kill the Minotaur. So he goes down, and the deal is getting into the labyrinth and finding your way back out is a challenge. So he gets this thread and uses that as the way to find his way in, kills the Minotaur, and comes back out by following that thread. So that's the story behind the Minotaur. So there's a lot of these labyrinths and images of the bull that come into play here. And this is actually a reproduction, a restoration of part of the Gnosis palace. These columns were actually cypress, not stone. And here's another picture of that palace. And here is a reproduction of what that palace would have looked like. Now, basically, it's a engineering feat, and there are these open colonnades for ventilation, and actually there's a real complexity to how the palace is laid out, and that served a couple of different purposes. It really is kind of labyrinthian in and of itself, and that would actually allow the defenders of the palace a lot of opportunities to throw stones, arrows, spears at anybody trying to invade. Okay. And one of the other things I wanted to bring out is we don't know that much about the true history of the Minoans or the Cycladians, because although there was a syllabic writing that they did, it was not deciphered. There's linear A and linear B, and the Minoan linear B actually was deciphered in the 50s by an amateur cryptologist. So they could read some of this and really get a little bit more of the history of Crete. But I wanted to bring up this Paul Klee and show the kind of mysterious cryptology that Paul Klee created, and look at the relationship between the symbols in the clay and the symbols on this stone. He most certainly would have seen this and have used some of these symbols in his work. And again, the decorative quality of the frescoes, the wonderful quality of this dolphin pod really serves no religious or mythic purpose other than the sheer joy of the decoration. It's really art for art's sake. I didn't show many of the flasks or jugs. There's a lot of this stuff, and this wonderful octopus. I just love that piece. I'm going to briefly touch on the Mycenaeans. They were much more primitive in certain ways in their art. They took that circle shows the entire area that they actually colonized and took over. So they were great in creating these amazing walls that they used for their fortresses. They called them cycloptic walls because the stones are so huge that it would take a cyclops to put them up. So the weight was really inventively, distributed in this lintel above that passageway. And you see below on the right the engraving on one of their swords. So there was a practicality to what they did. There were a lot of these death masks, Mask of Agamemnon. Again, we're still talking 1500 BCE. Now, what happened at around 11 wait a minute, 1100 BCE, a millennium before the actually it was about 600 years before classical Greek. The classical Greeks came in around 500. In fact, the Homer and the development of Greek mythology and that culture came in around 500. So there was about a 500-year period of what was called the Dark Ages. And during that period, actually, the Mycenaeans, their whole culture, the cities disbanded. There were goat herds and still people living on the islands and fishermen and all that, but the organized culture kind of disbanded, dissolved, and it wasn't until around 500 BCE that the real Greek culture started to take ascent and develop what we know today as Greek mythology. The Iliad and the Odyssey were, I don't know, 500 BC. So there we have it. There are some wonderful lectures on the Bronze Age Aegean. This guy, Travis Lee Clark, really terrific historian and art historian and archaeologist, knows his stuff great. And Netra Mitchell is fun and really interesting. Another one that you can go to YouTube and watch. So there we have it.
Yes, and your enthusiasm was quite contagious. I'm sure everybody here just absolutely loved it. So thank you, Larry. That was a great program. I thoroughly enjoyed it. So much I could talk to you about after this, which we will. So thank you all for coming. Enjoy the rest of this beautiful day, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.